This will be the 2-minute warning, so get your seats. In about 2 minutes, we will begin. Take your seats now.
If everyone can, please silence their cell phones as well. Thank you.
Mark time. Come on. Detail. Halt. Center. Hey. Hooray. Hey. Eddie.
Good morning. I'm Bart Walker of WGNS Radio, and will be serving as your MC today. Today we remember the fateful day of September the 11th, 2001, and the terrorist attacks. We remember the lives lost. We're grateful to the military who responded, and we honor America. Please stand for the invocation, if you would. The Reverend Michael McDonald, a member of the Rutherford County Juvenile Detention Board, will give our invocation.
Be still and know that I am God, Father, the mighty Jehovah, the Alpha and the Omega, the great I am, the author and the finisher of our faith. We gather together here today upon this hallowed ground under your divine command and the protection of Saint Michael, patron saint of law enforcement, firefighters, and first responders, and remember and honor the 2,977 lives lost on Tuesday, the 11th of September, 2001. On this Patriot Day memorial service, we ask you, Lord, to comfort the families of those lost on 9/11. May the many heroic acts and sacrifices of that day be honored through our servanthood to our communities, this great nation, and the world, and not be remembered as a bookend of the new millennium, relegated to a footnote in the archives of humanity. Let the loss of our innocence on that day rest any doubts about the cautionary words of Apostle Paul to the world in Ephesians chapter 6. We wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against principalities and powers and spiritual wickedness in high places. Put on the entire armor of God, that you may stand against the wiles of the enemy. In closing, I pray for the unity and harmony we Americans willed to our sovereignty on Wednesday, September 12th, 2001. Echoing the words of our Commander-in-Chief, President George W. Bush, our country is strong. A great people have been moved to defend a great nation, quote unquote. This memorial is a testament to who we are and our unwavering commitment to never forget. For if we've learned anything and nothing else from this conspired, premeditated act of terrorism, it is that life is short, living unpredictable, dying irrevocable, death is not proud, and there is no time for hate, if there were only time for love. In all that we do, may the glory be to you, omnipotent and omnipresent, in the name of our Father, and of the Son, and of the Holy Ghost. And the people of the great I Am all proclaimed, Amen.
Thank you, Reverend McDonald. Retired U.S. Navy Captain Phil Barnett will lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance.
Detail! Attention! Fire! Hey!
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Senior Kendall Latah of the Siegel High School Choir will sing our national anthem.
Reset! Halt!
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we hailed at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red clear, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Order! Halt! Right! Hey! Parade! Red! Eddie!
Thank you, Kendall. You may be seated, and Sheriff Mike Fitchue, who is making this possible today, has some thoughts to share with you.
Thank you, Bart. On behalf of the Rutherford County Sheriff's Office, I'd like to welcome each and every one of you here. And before we start, there's some people I'd like to recognize. Mayor Joe Carr, Commissioner Pettis Reed, Commissioner Romel Murray, Commissioner Santo Sereno, Judge Jimmy Turner, Sheriff Truman Jones, Chief Chris Muse, Sergeant Sean Boyd, State Representative Mike Sparks, State Representative Robert Stevens, and I'd also like to recognize our public safety partners that are joining us today from the various agencies. This is an honored day. I'd like to give kind of an idea of what stands behind me. This is a monument, and for those of you that are not familiar with it, the monument's focus is a 3,000-pound I-beam from the Tower 1 of the World Trade Center. It is supported by 3 pedestals representing firefighters, law enforcement, and paramedics. The artifact points towards New York City. The firefighters' column is the tallest since that agency suffered the most fatalities. 4 urns on each corner represents the innocent victims flying on 4 airplanes. The terrorists crashed into the 2 World Trade Center towers, the Pentagon, and a farm field in Pennsylvania. Rutherford County's 911 memorial at the Sheriff's Office was dedicated while Sheriff Truman Jones was here in 2011, a decade after the terrorist attack on America. I'd like to end with a statement that was made by President George W. Bush in 2008. One of the worst days in America's history saw some of the bravest acts in America's history. We will always honor the heroes of 911. We pledge that we will never forget their sacrifice. Again, thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Mike Fitzhugh. Retired U.S. Air Force Colonel Thomas L. Hickerson is our keynote speaker today. His experience included communications network, the operation of that, security, and his leadership spanned all levels. He led space communications through the crucial period after the Challenger accident. And as the senior communicator for the Gulf War, Colonel Hickerson led an international team when Saddam Hussein attempted to come south. After his Air Force career, he worked as the program manager for Lockheed Martin, providing the backbone network and the capability for the Pentagon's customers. He led the team into the burning Pentagon on 9/11. That team restored and assured unfaltering support through the September 11th attack and the days afterwards. Colonel Hickerson named Lockheed Martin's highest award. He earned that, the Nova Award, for his leadership. He received numerous other medals and awards, and he served as the state of Tennessee's executive director of operations. Colonel Hickerson lives in Smyrna, where he served as chairman of the town of Smyrna's Beer Board and Planning Commission. He is a board member of the Tennessee Fisher House. He is vice president of the Stones River chapter of the Sons of American Revolution. Please welcome Colonel Hickerson.
Thank you. I'd like to thank all of you who are here, and I would especially like to thank our sheriff and Rutherford County for making today possible. It's important to remember September the 11th, 2001. I'm a little bit deaf, and sometimes my voice gets so low that you can't hear me. So if that is the case, one of you folks in the back, raise your hand. My wife normally accompanies me, but she couldn't make it today. Today what we're going to talk about is one man's account of the events surrounding the terrorist attacks on September the 11th. 2001. The actions and reactions of people on the scene. This is the story of the front line of the first battle on the war on terrorism. I'm going to talk with you for a few moments about some veterans out of uniform and their role that day, and the untold story of heroes. And when I talk about heroes, I'm not talking about football players with $100 million salaries. I'm talking about men and women who knowingly risked their life for something greater than self. Terrorists can shake the foundations of our biggest buildings, but cannot touch the foundation of America. George W. Bush, September the 12th, 2001. As was mentioned, under my leadership, Lockheed Martin had a contract to operate and maintain the critical backbone systems of the Pentagon. That's the computer systems, the networks, the email between action officers, recommendations for action to the heads of the military services, the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, the Secretary of Defense, phone calls, video teleconferences between our senior military and the civilian leaders. Perhaps most importantly, to carry their orders and instructions to the field. It's the core of command and control of our military forces. There's a place in the Pentagon, the Network Systems Management Center, which I'll call the center. It's a state-of-the-art facility. It operates 24 hours a day, 7 days a week in the basement of the Pentagon. And after winning the contract, we'd put together a team of 250 men and women. Since the 1st of February, we had built processes, we'd improved systems, we'd rebuilt the power plant, we'd hired, we'd trained, and we were still learning the job. September the 11th was a normal day. 8 a.m. we had our operations meeting, and after that meeting I went down to my office in the second basement of the Pentagon. About 9 a.m. we got a call saying that the World Trade Center had been hit by an aircraft. Flight 11 crashed into that north tower at 8:46. A few moments later, we were informed that the second building had been hit by an aircraft. Flight 175 hit the south tower at 9:03. Well, I went down to the center and looked at CNN coverage because I found from 30 years in the military, sometimes CNN had more up-to-date information than even we did on the scene. Everything was working well. Our networks were up. I went back to the office. About 10 a.m., people came into the office saying the Pentagon had been hit and that the military had ordered us to evacuate. American Flight 77 crashed into the Pentagon at 9:37 that morning, killing 59 people. And, you know, I didn't hear anything. I didn't feel anything. That old building was built in 5 sections. It was built during World War II. In fact, the groundbreaking of the Pentagon was September the 11th, 1941, 60 years to the day before the attack. And it was built with concrete, not as much metal as we would use today, because remember, the metal was going into ships and to tanks, and so the building was built with lots of concrete. Well, I did what I would normally do. I picked up my briefcase, put my keys in my pocket, and went to the center to see what was going on. And yes, we had red alerts in the areas that had been hit by the aircraft. And in that center, there's a raised dais, something like this. And I stood on that raised dais, and I could look out over the center, and I pointed out that we probably could not abandon the facility. This was the lifeline of information, of orders, of command and control of our military. And if there was ever a time when our nation needed command and control, this was it, because the magnitude of the attack was unknown. This was the third attack of how many? Well, I stood there and I did that. And I hemmed and I hawed and I rolled forward and I rolled back. And 4 people stood up and said, "Boss, we know what you cannot ask. I'll stay behind." 4 military retirees who volunteered to stay behind and man 4 critical positions in the center. Well, I walked up a flight of stairs and found a crowd in the hallway. The military had ordered us back into the building because there was supposedly another attack in progress. That's where I picked up my deputy and my chief of staff. After a few minutes, they said, "Okay, it's all clear. You may go out." We walked outside across the bridge over Highway 110 to the north parking lot and gathered with thousands of others. And if I looked over my shoulder, I could see black smoke pouring out of the south side of the building. And that smoke just seemed to grow blacker and blacker and larger and larger. And people were milling around talking of potential attacks as the crowds gathered watching that building burn. You know, it's a darn good thing we weren't facing a very savvy enemy, because a well thought out plan would have done a lot more. Like any good government building, we had pre-designated gathering areas in the event of an evacuation, pre-designated in the parking lots. Now, 25,000 people were standing out in areas that would have been known beforehand. Can you imagine what a bomb or some gas placed in those areas would have done to the morale of the folks that went out? It would have been a truly demoralizing event. Well, members of my team started gathering around me. Sometimes it's not that bad to be gray-haired and maybe a little bit taller than the average bear. And it's interesting. Cell phones were all but useless. The networks were busied out. But there was one member of our team whose cell phone worked, and he was able to call his wife and let her know that we had made it out safely and we were still alive. We gave her our contact information. And speaking of cell phones, wouldn't you know it, that was the one day that I'd left mine in the charger at home. I don't do that anymore. My wife will tell you, we can be 5 miles from home or 10 miles, and if I go and it's not there, we're going back home. There was another lady who was on a different network. I think she was on T-Mobile, and she was able to make phone calls, and she had a crowd of our folks standing around making them. Her big concern was her minutes. Remember those days you bought a plan with minutes? And I told her, you just keep making those calls till your battery goes out, and if you get a bill for your minutes, bring it to me. We're good for it. The radios reported there was another aircraft inbound for the Pentagon, and police said we needed to leave the area. Those with cars in that parking lot formed informal carpools. Hey, I've got 2 seats and I'm going to Springfield. I got 3 for Fairfax. And folks gathered and began taking care of one another. The radio said the metro was closed and the roads were jammed with cars. Human nature, being what it was, with the concern of this incoming, some folks ran to hide under bridges. Well, an hour passed, maybe a little more, and that plume of smoke just kept getting blacker. And it's funny, you may have seen it. There were 2 police helicopters that came and hovered on opposite sides of the Pentagon, protecting the Pentagon as if they could. But they did what they could. And about that time, an F-16 came in 100 feet off the ground, did 2 circles around the Pentagon, and went straight up. Go Air Force. Folks, it's going to be all right now. Well, I had picked up my division chiefs and some of our employees, and we began to walk towards the Lockheed Martin building half a mile away in Crystal City. The staff manning the center had to evacuate when it got so bad they could no longer see or breathe. Doris, a retired major, had the forethought to pick up her list of our employees and their contact information. That was going to be important a little bit later. The power plant, and it stood strong, and its generators kept supplying power to the command centers. Luckily, I'd rebuilt that after decades of disabuse. And I led the team towards the Lockheed Martin building. By then, I had a group of 15 to maybe 20 folks, and we walked around the Pentagon. Saying walking around the Pentagon is interesting because it's built where the Potomac River comes up. There are freeways and roads all around it. So to walk away from the danger, we had to walk toward the danger until we could walk to that building. And it's interesting. One of my fellows, Seth, came up and said, "Boss, you know I have a mentally challenged son. He's freaking out. Can I go home to him?" Can you imagine Seth asking me, his boss, for permission to go to his son during a crisis? That's the kind of devotion to duty that all bosses hope to see. Well, we got to the building and we went in and had lunch. There was a little delicatessen there on the first floor, and I took the whole team in to eat because who knows when we'd be able to eat again. And it's interesting. When I gave the man at the deli my credit card, it wouldn't work. My Lockheed Martin Platinum Program Manager's credit card, $25,000 limit, and folks, that was a lot of money then, wouldn't work because the modems that carried the information back to the credit card companies, like the other phone lines, were busied out. The man in the deli said, "You have an honest face. You come back and pay me." And I did. We went up to the Lockheed Martin building office, and I went, got one knock in when the manager opened the door. I said, "Hi, he said, "I know who you are. What do you want?" And I said, "I need to take over your building." I took my senior staff to his conference room and set up a command post. I took our younger folks to the cubicles in the back, and we took those lists of our employees and copied them and began the process of locating all of my 250 employees. And we found them all unharmed. The last one we found 2 days later, in the last place I was expected to see him, at work on a shift in the center. My deputy contacted a Lockheed Martin VP who said, "Be sure that you have contracting officer approval before you do anything or spend any money." I called the president of Lockheed Martin, and she said, "Tom, just do the right thing. We're all Americans, and don't you worry about the money. But oh yeah, don't spend more than $1 million without calling me." That's the best support I ever got from that lady. Well, we walked back into I also set up that conference room. And I got a hold of the senior SES, that's very senior civilian, who was in charge of the center. And I said, Fred, where are you? He said, I'm going home. I said, Fred, I need you to turn and come to the Lockheed Martin building. I need your credentials to get in the building. And he did. By 6 p.m., we had a preliminary plan, and we walked back into that building, a building that was still in flames. There was smoke everywhere. Water was still being poured on the side that was inflamed. And that's the side we walked in through. And the corridors were empty, and they were closed, and my footsteps echoed on the hard floors. And there was the smell of burned insulation, of transformers when they overheat. And the courtyard, which has classically been called Ground Zero since the Cold War, was set up as a makeshift emergency center and morgue. And body bags were already gathering there. And it was bathed in an eerie yellow light of portable lights going through smoke. And we walked the corridors, and we went back to the center to look at the damage. And our networks were up, except in the areas that had been hit. We established 24-hour-a-day communications and began planning on how to restore things. A little bit later, I walked the corridors some more to see how bad the damage really was. Smoke was everywhere. There was water on the ground. Corridors were closed. And there was that smell. And there was that smell. Well, the next few days we worked around the clock. The Pentagon and the nation were at a virtual standstill. The cafeterias that normally fed 25,000 people were closed. So I brought in some cold cuts from that deli. I did go back to pay the man. And we set up a table. An aide to one of the assistant secretaries of defense came up and said, Sir, would it be okay if my boss made a sandwich? He hasn't eaten in 18 or 24 hours. And I said, today we're all Americans and we share. The rescue crews were working around the clock, still looking for people in the rubble. And they assessed the fire, water, and smoke damage. Fortunately, the plane hit an area that was being refurbished. And so half of the area that was hit was not occupied, or there would have been more than 192,000 casualties that day. We had daily assessment meetings to plan what to do next. As a contractor, I had some flexibility. I brought in another 175 folks to help with the restoration and with assessing some of the damage. And you know, the challenges were more than you really think about because it was a crime scene. And the FBI had jurisdiction over that, a closed crime scene. And also, we had to help make places for 5,000 people to come back to work. They couldn't go back to their offices in that section that was hit. So we had to plan communications, desks, places to work, and put in networks outside the Pentagon. And the Army data, which was in that area, was on some very vital servers that were not well backed up. And it was their personnel data. It was interesting. Seth, you remember that fellow that asked to leave? Came in and said, Boss, have you got any trading material? I said, trading material, Seth? He said, yeah, you know. I said, well, all I've got's a box of Lockheed Martin Program Manager pens. He grabbed them and left. The next day, Seth came in my office wearing an FBI cap. And we had access to the area and were able to get the servers out. And we built a new server farm in our controlled area. Seth and his trading material, plus my hazmat teams, had made that possible. My experience in Hurricane Andrew told me those servers would fail soon, so we replaced them. And we talk about response. The response to the U.S. was overwhelming in the days that followed. It was bright as day in that south parking lot once the smoke went down. McDonald's was there, Burger King, the Salvation Army, the Red Cross, heck, even the Baptists were there, providing a place that you could sit and take a break from that smell and have a cup of coffee and a sandwich as we rebuilt. My normal partners in the computer world, folks like Cisco, called to say, "We know what you need, Tom. We helped design it. Everything we have is on its way to you. Just tell us and we'll bring it in." And the response in Smyrna, Tennessee was absolutely outstanding. My wife, Elizabeth, was home with our daughter who was critically ill. And they went to church that evening, and she took her phone and said, "I'm going to keep this on through church. I will not silence it until he calls me." Well, I didn't get home till 2 a.m. and call her, and she was not happy that it took that long for me to get the call through. There were some real heroes that day. Former military and civilians, directed by God. People like Doris, who stood by the network center. People that stood by the power plant. The firemen and men and women that walked back into a burning building. My secretary, who came back the next day, she was terrified, but she was there. She panicked when that light aircraft came into D.C.'s airspace the next day, but she stayed. And think about some other heroes. The teachers in the local area. Remember, 25,000 moms and dads went to work that morning. Some of them weren't coming home that evening. And the teachers would go to the break room and see that, and then have to put on that game face and go back to the classroom and console those students. It wouldn't be me if I didn't leave you with some leadership thoughts. Don't panic. 2 minutes to gather some data that you need can pay off later in finding your employees. Trust people to be there when needed. Trust your instincts and do the right thing. Take charge. Make a decision. A plan without action is a dream. Communicate, communicate, communicate. A morning meeting to check progress and set priorities pays dividends. Temper the mission with people. Let some go. Eat when you can. And remember, everybody needs to rest a little bit. I asked the question, Lord, what am I doing here? You know, there wasn't a plan for an attack on the Pentagon. Perhaps an old war horse with 30 years' experience needed to be there. The power plant hadn't been rebuilt in decades, but because we rebuilt it, it stood strong. The trust that we had let us partner to rebuild the communications. And a final untold story. As you walk out across Highway 110 to get to that parking lot, if you look over to your right, you see the Pentagon Athletic Center. If you look to your left, you see the Child Care Center. And some of the folks that work with me evacuated that Child Care Center that day. Imagine, if you will, an old colonel running across the parking lot with a kid under each arm, because our folks thought, save the nation, save the children. Thank you for remembering 9/11 and for your prayers. And I'll leave you with this one thought. God bless the families of those who were involved in 9/11. God bless America. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Colonel Ickerson. Very informative, very touching. Please stand and remain standing for the raising of the POW MIA flag by Rolling Thunder.
Detail! Attention! Well! Hey! Reset! Hold! Ready! Aim! Hold! Ready! Ready! Hold! Reset! Hold! Order! Hold!
You're invited to tour the 9/11 Memorial, symbolizing America's freedom, unity, and patriotism. This concludes our ceremony this morning.